The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday, Ruth Calloway had already told half of Hargrove, Illinois, that Mabel Rosewood was nothing but a shameless woman trying to pass off another man's bastard child as respectable. She said it loud enough that Mabel heard it through the thin wall of the general store. She said it without flinching, without lowering her voice, without the smallest flicker of shame on her powdered face. Ruth Calloway looked Mabel dead in the eye across a row of dry goods and sugar sacks, and she smiled, the way a person smiles when they know they have already won. Mabel was holding Emma. The baby was 6 months old and half asleep against her shoulder, and Mabel's arms tightened around her daughter so hard the baby stirred and made a small, confused sound. That was the moment Mabel Rosewood decided she was leaving Illinois and never coming back. If you have ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet, if you have ever stood in a room full of people and understood with absolute certainty that not one of them was going to help you, then you already know exactly what Mabel felt in that moment. And if you want to know whether she survived what came next, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story to the end, because what happens to Mabel Hayes at Hayes Valley Ranch in the Montana Territory is going to stay with you for a long time. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. The train west out of Chicago smelled like coal smoke and other people's lunches, and the particular staleness of a car that had been carrying strangers for too long. Mabel found a seat by the window near the back, settled Emma into the crook of her left arm, and put her suitcase on the floor between her feet where she could feel it. She did not sleep that first night. She sat in the dark with the prairie rolling past outside and Emma's warm weight against her chest, and she went over every decision that had brought her to this car, this seat, this exact particular darkness. She was 24 years old. She had $12. She had a letter from a man named Colton Hayes who needed a wife, and had been told, plainly and in writing, that she came with a 6-month-old daughter. He had written back anyway. That was the thing she kept returning to. He had written back. His letter was short. Colton Hayes did not appear to be a man who used words carelessly or in excess. But it was clear. The child is not a problem. I have room. If you are willing to work hard and mean what you say, come in June. Mabel had read that letter so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. She had read it on the floor of her rented room while Emma slept. She had read it by lamplight while she tried to decide whether to believe it. She had read it one final time standing on the train platform with Ruth Calloway's voice still ringing in her ears. And she had folded it and put it in her coat pocket and stepped onto the train. She was willing to work hard. She had been working hard her entire life. Mabel's first husband, Thomas Briggs, had been a handsome man who made promises the way some men drink water, constantly, reflexively, without particular thought. She had believed him when he said he loved her. She had believed him when he said they would build something together. She had believed him right up until the afternoon she came home from her work at the laundry to find his side of the wardrobe empty and a note on the kitchen table that said only, "I am sorry, I cannot do this." He had not mentioned the baby. She had been 4 months along. She had not heard from Thomas Briggs since. The people of Hargrove had opinions about this, and they shared those opinions freely. Some of them were kind about it. They did not say it to her face, at least, or they waited until she had passed before they spoke. Ruth Calloway was not one of those people. Ruth Calloway had made Mabel's situation a kind of personal project, a running commentary delivered at church socials and across countertops and through the walls of general stores. Ruth Calloway had a theory, which was that women like Mabel, by which she meant women who had made a mistake and were living visibly with the consequence of it, were a moral problem that decent communities had an obligation to address. Mabel had never understood exactly what addressing her was supposed to accomplish. She had a baby to feed. She still needed flour. The laundry work had dried up after Emma was born. It turned out that the women of Hargrove did not particularly want their linens handled by someone whose personal life gave Ruth Calloway so much material. Mabel had taken in mending instead, working by lamplight after Emma slept, her eyes aching, her fingers raw. She had kept the room. She had kept herself and her daughter fed. She had done all of this without asking anyone for anything. And then, in March, her landlady, Mrs. Fenwick, had sat her down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the kind of expression that preceded bad news, and had explained that her husband's brother was coming to stay and they would need the room. She was sorry. She truly was. Mabel had sat there with the tea going cold in her hands and thought, so this is what the bottom looks like. She had answered 3 matrimonial advertisements the following week. 2 men had not written back at all. One had written back to say he had since found someone more suitable. Colton Hayes had been the 4th. Emma woke just before dawn somewhere in Iowa, and Mabel fed her and changed her and walked her up and down the narrow aisle of the train car until the baby settled again. And an older woman in the second row watched this with an expression that Mabel had learned to read quickly. Not unkind exactly, but measuring, cataloging, filing Mabel away in whatever category the woman kept for young women alone on trains with infants. "Heading west?" the woman asked when Mabel passed her for the 3rd time. "Montana," Mabel said. "You have family there?" Mabel hesitated. "I'm to be married." The woman's expression shifted, cataloging again, recalculating. "The baby's father?" "No," Mabel said, and kept walking. She was not ashamed of Emma. She had been ashamed for a while. Shame had been the weather of her life in Hargrove, the thing she walked through every day, gray and close and inescapable. But somewhere between Mrs. Fenwick's kitchen table and the train platform, the shame had started to feel less like something that belonged to her, and more like something that had been handed to her by other people who needed somewhere to put their discomfort. Emma had not asked to be born. Mabel had not asked to be left. She was done carrying things that weren't hers to carry. She arrived in Miles City, Montana, on a Thursday morning, when the sky was the particular pale blue of early summer and the air tasted like something she didn't have a name for. Clean, she thought, was the closest word, though it was more than that. There was space in it. The sky went on in a way that Illinois sky never had, like something had reached down and pulled the horizon out to its fullest extent. A boy of about 14 was waiting at the station with a sign that had Rosewood written on it in large, careful letters. "That's me," Mabel said. The boy looked at Emma. Then he looked at Mabel. Then he looked at Emma again. "Mr. Hayes said there'd be a baby," he said finally, in the tone of someone confirming a rumor they had not quite believed. "There is," Mabel said. "I'm Billy," the boy said. "I work the horses. Mr. Hayes sent me because he had fence line to deal with." He picked up her suitcase before she could protest. "Buckboard's out front. It's about 2 hours." Mabel followed him out of the station and into the wide, sunlit street. A wagon was tied to the post out front, 2 brown horses standing patient in the heat. Billy loaded her suitcase in the back with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times, then looked at her uncertainly. "You need help getting up?" he asked, eyeing Emma. "I can manage," Mabel said, and did. The ride to Hayes Valley Ranch was the longest 2 hours of Mabel's life. Not because it was uncomfortable, though the road was rough in places, and Emma fussed twice, and the sun was stronger out here than she had expected. It was long because she spent the entire 2 hours trying to prepare herself for the moment. She had been dreading since she'd put her name on the reply envelope in Hargrove. The moment Colton Hayes looked at Emma and changed his mind. She had told herself it was different this time. She had the letter. He had said the child was not a problem. She had told herself this while she packed, and on the train, and on the platform in Miles City, and here in the buckboard with the Montana grass stretching flat and golden to every horizon. But somewhere deep under the telling herself, there was a voice that knew how these things went. Thomas Briggs had made promises too. The man who had written back to say he'd found someone more suitable had not mentioned her daughter by name, but Mabel was not foolish enough to miss the calculation. Words on paper were one thing. A woman stepping down from a wagon with another man's child in her arms was something else entirely. "You scared?" Billy asked. Mabel looked at him. He was watching the horses, not her, his expression carefully neutral in the way of someone who had been told not to be nosy and was fighting the instinct. "Should I be?" she said. Billy thought about this. "Mr. Hayes is quiet," he said finally. "Some people think quiet means mean. It doesn't always." "What does it mean, with him?" Billy was quiet for a moment himself. "He lost his wife," he said. 4 years ago. She was—" He trailed off, seeming to decide he'd said enough. "He's just quiet." Mabel looked back at the road ahead. A wife. So there had been someone before. She filed this away and held Emma a little tighter against the rocking of the wagon. The ranch appeared at the top of a long rise. Not a dramatic appearance, not the kind of thing she might have imagined if she'd been the imagining type. It was a low, practical-looking set of buildings arranged in a loose square around a central yard. A main house, a barn, a smaller structure she guessed was a bunkhouse, several outbuildings in various states of completion. Fencing ran out from either side of the yard in both directions, neat and well-maintained. A kitchen garden occupied the near side of the house, and she could see it needed work. The place had the look of somewhere that had been kept up carefully, but without particular joy. Billy brought the buckboard to a stop in the center of the yard, and Mabel climbed down before he could offer to help. Emma balanced on her hip and stood looking at the main house. The door opened. Colton Hayes was not what she had expected, and she would think about that later, about how she had assembled some idea of him from his letters, and from Billy's careful comment about him being quiet, and how the man who walked out of that door matched none of it. He was taller than she'd imagined, and broader, and younger. He couldn't have been more than 30, 32 at the outside. His face was the kind that had been left alone by weather and hard years, marked by it but not destroyed. He had dark hair going a little gray at the temples, and he walked across the yard with the deliberate economy of a man who had never in his life wasted movement. He stopped about 6 feet away from her. His eyes went to Emma first. He looked at the baby for a long moment, long enough that Mabel's chest tightened, and then he looked at Mabel. "Miss Rosewood," he said. "Mr. Hayes," she said. His eyes went back to Emma. The baby had decided this was an interesting situation and was watching Colton with the alert, gravity-defying attention that babies brought to new faces. "How old?" Colton asked. 6 months, Mabel said. "Nearly 7. He nodded once, as if this confirmed something he'd expected. "She give you trouble on the train?" "Some," Mabel said. "Mostly at night." "That'll be a problem here too," he said. "I wake early." "So do I." He looked at her then, really looked, the kind of assessment that was not rude exactly, but made no effort at politeness either. She held still and let him do it, because she understood that she was doing the same thing to him. "You're thinner than I expected," he said. "I've had a hard year," she said. Something in his face shifted, almost imperceptibly. He nodded again. "Billy'll bring your things in. Come inside. Martha made food." He turned and walked back toward the house. Mabel exhaled slowly. She had been so prepared for rejection that plain pragmatism had completely disarmed her. Oh. Martha turned out to be a large, forthright woman in her 60s who had apparently been with the ranch long enough that she treated Colton Hayes with the comfortable authority of a person who had been feeding someone since childhood. She took one look at Mabel in the kitchen doorway, looked at Emma, and said, "Sit down, you look half-starved," in a tone that did not invite debate. Mabel sat down. The kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee and biscuits and something savory on the stove. Colton sat across the table from her and poured coffee without asking whether she wanted any, which turned out to be the right decision. "Martha manages the house," he said. "She'll show you how things work. I'll expect you to take over most of it once you're settled." "That's fine," Mabel said. "I don't expect that to happen overnight," he said. "You need time to learn how things are done here." Martha set a plate in front of Mabel without ceremony. "Eat," she said. "We can talk about all that later. The girl just got off a 3-day train." Colton looked at Martha. Martha looked back at him with the tranquil certainty of someone who had long since established the boundaries of her authority. He picked up his coffee cup. Mabel ate. After the meal, Martha took Emma so Mabel could see the room she'd been given, a small room off the back of the house, clean and simply furnished, with a window that looked out toward the barn. Someone had put a wooden crib near the window, the kind that looked handmade, recent, not worn. Mabel stood looking at the crib for a long moment. She turned to find Colton in the doorway. "Billy made it," he said before she could speak. "Figured a baby needed somewhere to sleep." "That was thoughtful," Mabel said. He shrugged, and she understood that the crib had been his idea, not Billy's, and that he was not going to say so. She looked at him across the small room. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I want to say something directly, if that's all right." He waited. "I know this arrangement is not conventional," she said. "I know Emma complicates things. I know what people say about women in my situation, and I am not going to pretend that any of it doesn't exist." She paused. "But I want you to know that I am not here looking for charity. I am here because I intend to work hard and hold up my end of this, and because I believe you are a man who keeps his word. I read your letter a lot of times, and that is the conclusion I came to. He was quiet for a moment. I keep my word, he said. So do I, she said. He nodded once. Good night, Miss Rosewood, he said, and left. Mabel sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and breathed. Not crying, just breathing, just letting the last several months compress and settle somewhere she could manage it. Emma was in the kitchen with Martha. The crib was by the window. Nobody had asked her to leave. She got up and unpacked her suitcase. Her first week at Hayes Valley Ranch taught Mabel several things she had not expected. The first was that Colton Hayes was, as Billy had said, quiet, but quiet in the sense of someone who had learned to economize, who had spent years in a silence that had eventually become his natural mode, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had grown accustomed to there being no one to say it to. When he did speak, it mattered. He did not fill space with words for the sake of filling it. The second was that the kitchen garden was in a worse state than she'd thought, and she went to work on it the second morning before anyone had told her to, because the beans were drowning and the squash needed something, and she could see exactly what it needed, and doing something with her hands was the only way she had ever known how to think. Colton came around the side of the house in the late afternoon and stopped when he saw what she had done. She straightened up and waited. You know gardens, he said. My mother's, she said. I grew up working it. He looked at the neat rows she'd established, the cleared beds, the trellises she'd improvised from sticks lying near the fence line. Then he looked at her. There was something in his expression that she couldn't name yet. She didn't know him well enough, but it wasn't displeasure. You didn't need to start today, he said. I know, she said. I wanted to. He looked at the garden again. Martha's been after me to fix that for 2 seasons, he said, which was the closest thing to a compliment she was going to get, and she understood that perfectly well. The third thing she learned about Hayes Valley Ranch was that there was a woman in Miles City named Vera Langston who had apparently had some expectation where Colton Hayes was concerned and who was not pleased about a mail-order bride arriving at the ranch. She learned this through Martha, who was constitutionally incapable of withholding information she considered relevant. Martha delivered the intelligence about Vera Langston over coffee on Mabel's 4th morning with the matter-of-fact completeness of a general briefing a soldier. She's the banker's daughter, Martha said. She's been after Colton since before his wife passed. He never gave her any reason to think he was interested, but she persisted. Martha refilled her own cup. She'll come out here. She always finds a reason. What should I do about that? Mabel asked. Nothing, probably, Martha said. Just know who she is when you see her. Mabel thought about this. Does Mr. Hayes know she'll come? Colton knows everything that happens in this county, Martha said. He just doesn't always choose to address it until he has to. Vera Langston arrived on a Friday, 8 days after Mabel, in a well-maintained buggy with a gift of preserves and the particular social confidence of a woman who had never in her life been made to feel unwelcome. She was beautiful, and she knew it, and she used it efficiently. She came to the kitchen door, which in Mabel's view meant she knew the house well enough to know that was where Colton was likely to be in the mid-morning. She had a smile prepared when the door opened, and for just a fraction of a second, when she saw it was Mabel who opened it, and not Martha, the smile flickered. You must be the new wife, Vera said. Not yet, Mabel said pleasantly. I'm Mabel Rosewood. We haven't had the ceremony yet. Vera's eyes moved past her into the kitchen. Is Colton about? He's in the north pasture, Mabel said. I can tell him you came by. Vera looked at Mabel then, the full deliberate assessment that women gave each other when they were measuring territory. Mabel stood very still and looked back. Emma chose this moment to make her presence known from the crib in the corner, a small, insistent noise that was not quite crying but was building toward it. Vera's gaze moved to the crib, then back to Mabel. The baby, she said. My daughter, Mabel said. Emma. Something crossed Vera Langston's face, not cruelty exactly, but something close to satisfaction, the look of a person who has just been handed useful information. Colton knows, she said. It was not quite a question. He does, Mabel said. Is there something you'd like me to tell him? Vera held out the jar of preserves. Just that I called, she said, and that I hope he's adjusting well to the new arrangement. Mabel took the preserves. I'll tell him, she said. She closed the door with precisely the right amount of firmness. Not a slam, not a retreat, exactly what the situation called for, and stood in the kitchen for a moment before going to Emma. "Hush," she said softly, picking up her daughter. "We're fine." She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she meant it. Colton came in at midday and she told him, as directly as she told him everything, that Vera Langston had visited and left preserves. He set his hat on the hook by the door and went to the wash basin and did not say anything for a long moment. "I'm not going to apologize for her," he said finally. "I didn't ask you to," Mabel said. He looked at her over his shoulder. Something shifted in his expression again. That thing she was beginning to learn to recognize, the slight recalibration that happened when she said something he hadn't been expecting. "Most women would want an explanation," he said. "I don't need one," she said. "I'm not asking you about your history. It's not mine to know." He dried his hands and turned around. "There's no history," he said. "Not with Vera." "I didn't assume there was," Mabel said. He was quiet for a moment. "She'll come back," he said. "Martha told me," Mabel said. He almost smiled. It didn't quite get there, but it came close, the smallest shift at the corner of his mouth. "Martha talks too much," he said. "Martha's been kind to me," Mabel said. "I appreciate her." He looked at her for a moment longer than he usually did. "You're not easily rattled," he said. "I've been rattled plenty," she said. "I just don't do it in front of an audience anymore." He picked up his hat from the hook, put it back on, and went back out. And Mabel stood in the kitchen with the preserves in her hand and something new and tentative opening up in her chest, something she did not have a name for yet and was not ready to examine too closely. She put the preserves on the shelf. There was dinner to make and a garden to finish and a daughter to raise. That was enough for today. Well, by the end of the second week, she had established a rhythm. She rose before Colton, which was no small thing, because Colton Hayes appeared to treat sleep as a mild inconvenience to be disposed of as quickly as possible, and had coffee ready before he came in from the first round with the horses. She fed Emma. She worked the kitchen and the garden. In the afternoons, when Emma slept, she took on whatever else the house needed. She was not performing domesticity. She was building something. Whether that something would hold was still a question she was not ready to answer. Billy had taken to stopping by the kitchen on his way to the barn, which Mabel understood was not entirely about the biscuits she left on the counter. The boy was lonely in the particular way of someone who was too old to be treated like a child and too young to be taken seriously, and Mabel had grown up around enough of that particular loneliness to recognize it. She let him talk. She asked him questions. She learned that he had come from a family outside of Billings that he didn't mention often, that he could gentle a spooked horse better than most grown men Colton had employed, and that he had a gift for the kind of practical carpentry that didn't need explaining. Things just ended up repaired. "The crib was good work," she told him once. He went red to his ears. "Mr. Hayes picked the wood," he said. "I know," she said, and left it at that. On the 18th day, Emma said a sound that was not quite a word but was reaching for one, and Mabel was the only one who heard it, and she sat on the kitchen floor with her daughter in her lap and felt the full complicated weight of raising a child alone, except that she was not, technically, alone anymore, and she was not sure what to do with that fact. Colton came in for lunch and found her there. He stopped in the doorway. "She's trying to talk," Mabel said, by way of explanation. He crouched down across from them, which brought him to eye level with Emma. Emma considered him with the absolute solemnity that babies brought to interesting problems. Then she reached out and grabbed his finger. Colton looked at her tiny hand around his finger and was very still for a moment. His face did something complicated and private that Mabel felt she was intruding on just by seeing it. "She does that," Mabel said quietly. "Yeah," he said, not looking up. He stayed like that for a while. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window and Emma held on. Mabel sat on the floor of the kitchen she was beginning to know and watched a quiet, hardened man hold very still so a baby could keep her grip, and understood that whatever this was, this arrangement, this beginning, this careful thing they were both walking out onto like uncertain ice, it was already something more than she had arrived expecting. She did not know yet what it would become, but for the first time in a very long time, she found that she was willing to wait and find out. The rhythm. Mabel had built in her first 2 weeks at Hayes Valley Ranch was not a comfortable thing. It was the kind of rhythm you build when you are afraid to stop moving, when stillness feels like an invitation for everything you've been outrunning to catch up with you. She woke before the sun. She kept her hands occupied. She did not let herself think too far ahead. But on the 22nd morning, the rhythm broke. She was at the stove when she heard it. Voices in the yard, more than one, and something in the tone that didn't belong to an ordinary morning. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window and saw Colton standing near the fence, with a man she did not recognize, a heavy-set man in a good coat who was doing most of the talking. Colton was listening with the particular stillness he used when something had his full attention, which looked from the outside like patience but was, she was beginning to understand, something else entirely. She watched him nod once. The man in the good coat handed him an envelope. Then he got back in his buggy and drove away without once looking at the house. Colton stood in the yard for a moment with the envelope in his hand. Then he put it in his coat pocket and came inside. "Who was that?" Mabel asked. "Gerald Whitmore," Colton said, going to the wash basin. "He runs the land office in Miles City." She waited. "He's claiming I owe back taxes on the east section," Colton said. "Says the assessment was revised last fall." "Was it?" Colton dried his hands. His jaw was set in a way she recognized now, the expression he wore when he was working very hard not to say what he was actually thinking. "I paid what I was assessed," he said. "Same as every year." "Then there's a record of it." "Should be." He put the towel down. "Whitmore says the records show differently." Mabel looked at him. "And do you believe him?" Colton was quiet for a moment. "I believe he showed up at my door at 7 in the morning with a sealed envelope," he said. "That tells me something." It told Mabel something too. She had grown up in a town small enough that she knew what it looked like when men with official titles used official paper to do unofficial things. She had seen it happen to her father once, a dispute over a property line that had somehow, through a series of steps that each looked almost reasonable in isolation, ended with the neighbor's cousin owning a strip of her father's best field. She didn't say this to Colton. He hadn't asked her to weigh in on his troubles. She poured him coffee and put it on the table and went back to the stove. But she thought about it all morning. The ceremony happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks after Mabel had arrived. It was not a large affair, which suited both of them. The circuit judge came out from Miles City with his records book, and Martha stood on one side and Billy stood on the other, looking as though he had combed his hair with actual intention for the first time in recent memory. Mabel wore the best dress she had, which was not particularly fine, but was clean and well pressed, and Colton wore a good shirt and had made some effort with his hair that she found, for reasons she could not entirely explain, unexpectedly moving. They stood in the main room of the house and said the words the judge directed them to say. When Colton took her hand to repeat the final words, his palm was rough and warm, and he held her hand like something he was not sure he was allowed to hold. She kept her eyes on the judge's face and said the words clearly and without hesitation, because whatever else was uncertain, her intentions were not. Afterward, Martha made a cake that was better than the occasion probably warranted, and Billy ate 2 pieces and tried to pretend he hadn't, and the judge stayed for coffee and talked about the weather and the state of the road from Miles City. Colton sat across the table from Mabel and watched Emma, who had fallen asleep in the blanket Martha had rigged in the corner, with an expression that he seemed unaware he was wearing. When the judge left, and Billy went back to the horses, and Martha went to clean up, Mabel and Colton sat for a moment at the cleared table in the quiet. "Well," Colton said. "Well," Mabel agreed. He looked at his coffee cup. "I know this isn't what you might have imagined." "I imagined exactly this," she said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough. "I didn't come here with illusions, Mr. Hayes." He looked up. "Probably ought to call me Colton now," he said. "Probably," she said. "Mabel." He nodded. Then he picked up his hat and went outside because there was work, and there was always work. And she understood by now that work was how he moved through the things he didn't yet have words for. She picked up Emma from the corner blanket and held her, and thought, married. The word sat strangely, but it sat. The trouble with Gerald Whitmore did not go away. Mabel had hoped, though she had not said so, that it might resolve itself in the clean, uncomplicated way that problems sometimes did, that Colton would produce his payment records and the matter would close. But on the following Tuesday, a second letter arrived, this time from a different office in Billings, confirming the original assessment and adding what it called administrative fees that had the effect of increasing the amount owed by nearly a third. Colton read the letter at breakfast and set it down with the careful deliberateness of a man who was doing significant work not to crumple it. "Same signature on both," he said. Mabel looked at the letters. She had, without quite deciding to, begun paying attention to the details of the ranch's paperwork. Not prying, exactly, but available, the way she had always been available when there was a problem that needed thinking through. She had a head for numbers and had always known it, had kept her own ledger through the hard years in Hargrove, with a precision that made the landlady comment on it once. "The original assessment," she said. "Do you have your copy?" "Filed in the desk," he said. "And the payment receipt?" He was quiet for a moment. "Should be with it," he said. "Should be?" He got up and went to the desk in the corner of the main room, pulled open the bottom drawer and sorted through it for a moment. The sorting went on longer than it should have. He came back to the table with a folder. "Receipt's not there," he said. Mabel looked at the folder. "When did you last see it?" "October," he said. "I filed it in October." Did anyone else have access to the desk? The question hung in the air between them. Colton's jaw did the thing it did when he was thinking hard and not happy about what he was thinking. "This ranch had 3 temporary hands through the fall," he said carefully, "and Whitmore's man came out in November to do the county assessment walk." "Did he come inside?" Colton looked at her. "Martha gave him coffee," he said. Mabel nodded slowly. She did not say what she was thinking, that an assessment man who came inside for coffee and happened to be standing near a desk that had a payment receipt in the bottom drawer was either very fortunate or had known exactly where to look. She did not say it because she was not yet certain, and because she was aware that accusing a county official of document theft was not a small thing. "I think you should go to Miles City," she said, "to the land office. In person, not by letter." "I plan to," he said. "Today," she said. He looked at her. "You think it moves that fast?" "I think someone went to the trouble of 2 official letters in under 2 weeks," she said. "I think they're trying to establish a record before you can challenge it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he got up from the table and put on his coat and hat. "Martha," he called toward the kitchen, "I'll be in town." "I heard," Martha said, from the kitchen, where she had clearly been listening. Colton paused in the doorway and looked back at Mabel. "You know something about this kind of thing," he said. It was not quite a question. "My father lost a field to it," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded and went out. Martha came in from the kitchen with the coffee pot and refilled Mabel's cup and sat down across from her. "He doesn't usually listen to people that fast," Martha said. "He listened to the argument," Mabel said. "Not to me." Martha gave her a look that said she thought the distinction was finer than Mabel was letting on. But she didn't say so, and Mabel was grateful for that. Colton came back from Miles City late, well past supper, and he came back with the set expression of a man who had gone looking for a fight and found something worse. Not resistance, but the smooth, courteous surface that powerful men used when they wanted you to understand that you were not going to win. Whitmore had been pleasant, had offered his own coffee, had expressed sympathy about the missing receipt, had explained that without documentation of payment, the assessment stood, and that the deadline for resolution was the 15th of the month, which was 19 days away. "He knows the receipt is gone," Colton said. He was at the table and Mabel had put food in front of him, and he was eating without tasting it, the way he ate when he was working through something. "He wasn't surprised at all that I couldn't produce it. Not one bit." "What's on the east section?" Mabel asked. "Best water access on the property," he said. "Creek runs through it. Without that section, the ranch doesn't work the way it should." Mabel thought about this. "Is there anyone in town who knew you made that payment? A witness, a shopkeeper, anyone who might have seen you go to the land office in October?" Colton chewed. "Jim Harker at the feed store. I paid him the same day. We were talking about the assessment when I came back through." "That's something," Mabel said. "Whitmore's got the full weight of the county behind him," Colton said. "Jim Harker's word against an official record isn't going to be enough." "Maybe not on its own," she said. He looked at her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Whitmore isn't doing this to just one ranch," she said. "I'm thinking this is something he's done before or is doing to others right now, and that means there are other missing receipts and other ranchers with the same problem." She paused. And a room full of ranchers is harder to dismiss than one. Colton was quiet for a long moment. He set his fork down. That's a larger fight than I was planning on, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her across the table, the full, direct look he sometimes gave her that she had learned to hold without looking away. You walked into this 3 weeks after you arrived, he said. I walked into a marriage, she said. This is part of what that means. He didn't say anything to that. He picked his fork back up. But something in the set of his shoulders changed, some fraction of the weight redistributing itself, and Mabel understood that she had said the right thing without quite having planned to. Martha was the one who knew which ranchers to talk to. This did not surprise Mabel, who had figured out within her first week that Martha's knowledge of the social and professional geography of the county was comprehensive, precise, and regularly updated through channels that remained somewhat mysterious. Martha knew who owed whom, who had quarreled with whom, who was struggling and who was quietly prospering, and, most relevantly, who had received a letter from the Miles City Land Office in the past 6 months. The answer, it turned out, was 4 ranchers. Martha delivered this information over the breakfast table on Wednesday morning with the efficiency of someone presenting a briefing they had already organized mentally into clear points. 3 of the 4 were smaller operations than Hayes Valley. A man named Declan Porter, who ran cattle 2 valleys over, a widow named Agnes Fitch, who had been managing her late husband's sheep ranch for 3 years, and a younger rancher named Paul Deere, who had come out from Ohio 2 seasons back and was still finding his footing. The 4th was a larger operation, the caraway spread north of town, which meant that Whitmore was either very confident or very greedy. Have any of them paid? Mabel asked. Agnes Fitch paid, Martha said. Or rather, she couldn't fight it, and she didn't have the money, so she gave up 20 acres of the southern field. Mabel thought of her father's strip of field. 20 acres. Does she know it wasn't legitimate? She asked. She suspected, Martha said, but suspecting and proving are different things. When can Colton get to them? Martha gave her a look. You mean when can you get to them? Mabel opened her mouth and closed it again. You're the one who figured this out, Martha said, not unkindly. You're the one who knows how to talk to people about it. Colton can introduce you, but he's never been comfortable asking for help. You are. This was more perceptive than Mabel was quite prepared for, and she wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or grateful. She settled on neither and said, I'll need the buggy on Thursday. Martha nodded. I'll watch Emma. Thursday was clear and cold, the kind of fall day in Montana that looked beautiful from inside a window, and was somewhat less beautiful when you were in a buggy on a dirt road with the wind coming down from the north, without any geographical feature to slow it down. Colton drove. He had not argued about coming, and Mabel had not argued about the fact that it would be more effective to have him along, not because she needed him exactly, but because in 1875 a woman arriving alone at a rancher's door to discuss legal strategy was working with a handicap she didn't need. They went to Declan Porter first. Porter was a compact, skeptical man in his 50s who had the bearing of someone who had been burned by trusting people before and had organized his entire personality around not repeating the experience. He listened to what Colton said about the letters and the missing receipt with an expression that got progressively tighter. Missing receipt, he said finally. Yes, Colton said. Mine went missing too, Porter said. October. Mabel watched his face. Was there an assessment walk on your property last fall? She asked. Porter looked at her. The slight recalibration that men of his generation made when a woman asked a direct practical question in a business conversation. He was not hostile about it, just adjusting. November, he said. County man came through. Said it was routine. Was it a man named Simmons, Porter said, friend of Whitmore's? Mabel and Colton exchanged a brief glance. It's not just your ranch, Porter, Colton said. Or mine. There are others. Porter was quiet. He looked out toward his cattle, who were doing the things cattle do in cold weather, which is mostly standing together and being collectively indifferent to human problems. Agnes Fitch already gave up her field, he said. I know, Mabel said. But you haven't. And if we go to the county commissioners together, with a pattern, not just individual complaints, it's a different conversation. Whitmore's brother-in-law is on the county commission, Porter said. The wind moved through the yard. Who else is on it? Mabel asked. Porter looked at her again, the recalibration happening again, but differently now, something shifting in his assessment. Nate Calloway, he said, and the former Reverend, Dale Marsh. He left the church last year. He's been appointed to fill Benton's seat. Is Marsh a fair man? I believe he is, Porter said slowly. Calloway, I don't know well enough to say. Mabel nodded. That's 2 out of 3, she said. We don't need all of them. We need the pattern, and we need enough voices that it can't be explained away. Porter looked at Colton. She always like this? He said. Mostly, Colton said. Porter made a sound that might have been approval. I'll come to a meeting, he said. I won't commit to more than that until I hear what the others say. That's all we're asking, Mabel said. Paul Deere, the rancher from Ohio, was easier. He was young, no more than 25, and he was frightened, which he was trying not to show. And Mabel recognized that particular combination of fear and pride and talked to him differently than she'd talked to Porter. She was straightforward with him. She told him exactly what she thought was happening and exactly what she thought could be done about it, without softening it or making it sound simpler than it was. She did this because she remembered being young and frightened and having people talk to her like she might break, and she had found that more frightening than the truth. He committed to the meeting without hesitation. Agnes Fitch was the last stop, and in some ways the hardest. Agnes was a stout woman in her late 50s with a face that had been made by 3 years of hard, independent decisions, and the particular grief of a woman who had buried a husband in country that was not her own and had kept working anyway. She received them in her kitchen, which was clean and small and had the feel of a place maintained by someone who was running at the edge of her capacity. She listened to everything Mabel said. When Mabel finished, Agnes was quiet for a long time. I signed the papers, she said. I gave up the field. That's not your fault, Mabel said. You didn't have the information you needed. I suspected, Agnes said, the same word she'd apparently told Martha. But I didn't have anyone to think it through with. There was something in that sentence that landed differently than it might have, given where Mabel had been 6 weeks ago. Sitting in a rented room, reading a 4th matrimonial advertisement without anyone to think anything through with. You have people now, Mabel said, and what happened to your field can be part of the pattern. It doesn't reverse what you lost, but it matters. It's evidence. Agnes looked at her hands on the kitchen table. You've been married to Colton Hayes for what, a month? About that, Mabel said, and you're already starting fights with the county land office on his behalf. It's my land too, Mabel said, and it's your land, and it's Porter's and Deere's, Whitmore's gambling that none of us will talk to each other. Agnes looked at Colton, who was sitting to the side in the way he sometimes sat in conversations he understood were not his to lead. She always like this? Agnes said. Declan Porter asked the same thing, Colton said. Agnes made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. All right, she said. I'll come to your meeting. I don't know what good it'll do, but I'll come. The meeting happened on the following Monday at Hayes Valley Ranch because it was the most central location and also because Mabel had decided, without announcing the decision, that if she was going to organize this, she was going to do it from her own house. Martha had made coffee and left it available in quantities that suggested she expected the conversation to go long. Colton opened the meeting because it was his land and because it was 1875. And some things you worked within even when you wished they were otherwise. He laid out the facts, the letters, the missing receipts, the assessment walk, Whitmore's pattern. Then he said, Mabel's been working through this. She'll tell you what she thinks. 4 people looked at Mabel. Porter, with his arms crossed and his expression guarded, Deere with the focused attention of someone who was writing notes in his head, Agnes with something careful and watchful and not quite hope, and a man named Harker, the feed store owner from Miles City, who had come along because he was the only living witness to Colton's original payment, and because Martha had, apparently, thought to invite him without consulting anyone. Mabel did not stand up. She stayed in her seat because standing up would make it a speech, and she didn't want it to be a speech. She wanted it to be a conversation between people who had a common problem. What Whitmore's done is clever, she said. He's done it to each of us individually, at intervals, and the individual complaint looks like a paperwork dispute. We look like ranchers who lost track of our own records. That's what he's counting on. She paused. But 6 complaints are not a paperwork dispute. 6 complaints with the same timeline, the same missing documentation, and the same assessment officer present at each property. That's a pattern. And the county commission can't ignore a pattern when it's presented formally and completely. Whitmore's brother-in-law is on the commission, Porter said. I know, Mabel said. But so is Dale Marsh, and I've asked around about Marsh. He's not a man who'll sit still for what he can see plainly. You've asked around, Porter said, the same careful recalibration. I have, Mabel said. I've been in this county 6 weeks, and I've been paying attention. Agnes Fitch made the almost laugh sound again. The other thing, Mabel said, is documentation. Every one of you should write out, today if possible, everything you remember about your payment, date, time, who you spoke to, whether anyone witnessed it, whatever you have. A receipt is better, but testimony is not nothing. She looked at Harker. And Mr. Harker was there when Colton paid in October. His account of that conversation matters. Harker, who had been sitting quietly with his coffee, nodded. I'll put it in writing, he said. Whitmore's had this county by the collar long enough. It was not a dramatic declaration. It was the sound of a man who was tired of something and had found, unexpectedly, a reason to do something about it. The others heard it the same way. After the meeting, when the others had left and Martha was cleaning up, and Billy had taken himself out to the barn with the particular tact of a boy who understood that adults sometimes needed to wrap up without an audience, Colton sat in the main room and looked at the table where 4 ranchers and a feed store owner had spent 2 hours talking about land records. Mabel was feeding Emma. The baby was fractious, more alert than tired, pulling at Mabel's hair with the single-minded determination that babies brought to everything they decided was interesting. That went better than I expected, Colton said. Porter will be the linchpin, Mabel said. If he stays committed, the others will follow him. He's the one they trust. He trusted you, Colton said. He trusted the argument, she said, which was what she always said. Colton was quiet for a moment. Mabel. She looked up. He was looking at the table, not at her. I know it's not what you planned when you came here, he said, getting pulled into someone else's legal trouble 6 weeks in. It's not someone else's, she said. He looked up. It's mine, she said. That's what the ceremony was. You told me you keep your word. I told you I keep mine. She paused. Unless you had a different understanding of what we agreed to. He was quiet for a long time. Emma had given up on Mabel's hair and had fallen abruptly, definitively asleep, in the way that small children did, like a lamp being switched off. I had a wife, he said, which was not what she'd been expecting him to say. Clara. She died of fever 4 years ago. We'd been married 8 years. Mabel held very still. She was... He stopped. He seemed to be looking for words he didn't usually need. She was the kind of person who made things make sense. When she was here, the ranch made sense. When she was gone, it just was. He picked up the edge of the tablecloth and set it down. I don't know how to do this the way I knew how to do it before. I want you to know that. I know, Mabel said. You're not a replacement, he said, with a directness that was almost harsh, and she understood it was the most honest thing he knew how to offer. I'm not pretending that's what this is. I'm not either, she said. What I'm saying is... He stopped again. I'm saying this is harder than I thought it would be. Not because of you. Because of me. Mabel looked at him across the room, this man she had known for 6 weeks, who had handed her a letter that said the child is not a problem, and had built a crib before she arrived, and had stood in her kitchen and held still so Emma could grip his finger. This man who was looking at the table and trying to say something true. Colton, she said. I was not much of anything when I came here. I know that. I'm not asking you to feel more than you do. I'm asking you to keep the agreement we made and let the rest come as it comes. He looked up. It was a good agreement, she said. Something in his face did the thing it did sometimes. The thing she hadn't quite put a name to yet. Not a smile. Something that lived next to one. Yeah, he said. It was. Emma slept on between them, breathing the slow, uncomplicated breath of someone who had no interest in the adult world's difficulties. And outside the Montana evening was closing in dark and cold and enormous. And inside the lamp was lit and the fire was going and something was building between 2 imperfect people at a table, slow and unannounced and more real for being neither of them having chosen it deliberately. It was not a comfortable thing, what they were building, but it was theirs. The petition took 11 days to write. Not because the words were hard to find, Mabel had a clear enough picture of what needed to be said, but because every word had to be the right one, the kind that could not be twisted or dismissed or quietly set aside by a man with a brother-in-law on the county commission. She worked on it in the evenings after Emma was down, at the kitchen table with the lamp pulled close, and she crossed out and rewrote the way she had once mended fabric, carefully, without rushing, because rushing was how you ended up with something that looked right until someone pulled on it. Colton read each version she showed him without comment, which she had come to understand meant he was thinking rather than ignoring her. On the third version, he sat down across from her and read it twice, and then said, "The paragraph about the assessment walk needs to be earlier. If Marsh reads this, you want him to see the pattern before Whitmore's name appears. Otherwise, it looks like a personal grievance." Mabel looked at the page. He was right. "You've been thinking about this," she said. "I've been thinking about this since October," he said, "when I couldn't find that receipt." He got up, moved the paragraph. He was not a man who said good work. She was not sure he knew those words in that arrangement. But she moved the paragraph, and the next morning, when she came downstairs, the lamp in the main room had been burning late. She could tell by the smell, and the spare chair at the desk had been pulled out. She did not mention it. Vera Langston came back on a Wednesday, and this time she did not bring preserves. She came in the buggy with her father's banker's seal on the side, and she came with a man Mabel did not know, tall, narrow-faced, with the careful grooming of someone who understood that appearance was a form of argument. Mabel was hanging washing when they came through the gate, Emma on a blanket on the ground nearby, making the determined noises of a child discovering that grass existed. Vera stepped down from the buggy and looked at Mabel and the washing and Emma on the blanket, and something passed across her face that was not quite contempt, but was in the same family. "Is Colton in?" she asked. "He's in the north pasture," Mabel said. "I can send Billy." "Please do," Vera said, in a tone that suggested this was the natural order of things. Mabel as the person who sent Billy. Mabel sent Billy. She invited them inside because not doing so would have cost her something she wasn't willing to spend. And she put coffee on because the same logic applied. And she sat at the kitchen table and did not make small talk because she had never been any good at it and saw no reason to start now. The man with Vera introduced himself as Lawrence Price. He had a card. He set it on the table in the particular way of men who believed a card on a table communicated something important. "I represent the Territorial Land Consortium," he said. "We have an interest in several properties in this county." "Including this one?" Mabel said. He smiled the way people smiled when they were deciding how much to tell you. "We represent a range of interests," he said. Mabel picked up his card and looked at it. The Territorial Land Consortium. She had not heard of it, which did not mean it was not real, but it meant it was not old. New organizations in the land business in 1875 Montana were either opportunity or trouble, and in her experience, those two categories overlapped more than was comfortable. Colton came in 20 minutes later with Billy behind him, and he stopped when he saw Price. A very brief stop, barely a pause, but she knew him well enough by now to see it. "Price," he said. "Hayes." Price stood. "Good to see you again." Mabel looked at Colton. He did not look back at her, which told her as much as a look would have. "Again," she said. "Mr. Price approached me last spring," Colton said, setting his hat on the hook, "about buying the east section." The east section, the one with the creek, the one Whitmore was trying to claim he owed back taxes on. Mabel set Lawrence Price's card back down on the table very carefully. "I told him I wasn't interested," Colton said. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "That hasn't changed." "Values have gone up considerably since spring," Price said pleasantly. "The consortium is prepared to make a very fair offer. Better than fair, given current conditions." "What current conditions?" Colton said. Price's expression shifted into the particular smoothness of a man delivering news he did not appear to be delivering. "Well," he said, "there's some uncertainty about the title situation on that section. Given the assessment matter, we thought it might be useful to offer a resolution." Mabel understood exactly what was happening, and the understanding arrived with a cold, clean clarity that she recognized as anger wearing its working clothes. Whitmore had gone after the east section. Price and the consortium had been waiting for Whitmore to do it. And now Price was here to buy the section at a price that would look generous to a man who thought he might lose it anyway. She looked at Vera Langston, who was sitting with her hands folded and her expression pleasant and her eyes on Colton's face, and she understood something else. Vera had brought Price here. Vera had made the introduction. Vera had her own reasons for wanting Hayes Valley Ranch to be in a position that needed rescuing. "The assessment matter is being addressed," Mabel said. Price looked at her with polite attention, the kind that had no particular plan to take what she said seriously. "We have filed a formal petition to the county commission," Mabel said. "We have witness testimony and a documented pattern of the same methodology used against 5 separate property owners. The commission hearing is scheduled for the 28th. This was not yet entirely true. The commission hearing date had not been confirmed, but the petition was real and the witness accounts were real and the hearing would happen, and Price did not know which parts were solid and which were still being assembled." "That's an ambitious approach," Price said. "It's the correct approach," Mabel said. "The east section is not in dispute. It will not be in dispute, and it is not for sale." Vera's gaze moved to Mabel for the first time since they'd sat down. The measurement was back, and something sharper underneath it. "Colton," Vera said, and her voice had a particular quality when she said his name, something that had been practiced. "You've taken on a significant fight for someone who's been here less than 2 months." "My wife's been here 6 weeks, Colton said. "She understands the situation." "I'm sure she's done her best," Vera said, the words perfectly arranged to be impossible to argue with directly, and perfectly designed to mean what they meant. Colton looked at Vera with an expression that Mabel had not seen on him before. Not anger exactly, but the face of a man who had decided something and was no longer undecided. "I think we're done here," he said. Price stood. He was still pleasant. He appeared to have only one setting, and he left his card on the table when he picked up his hat, because men like Price always left their cards, on the theory that circumstances changed. "The offer stands," he said. "We're patient people." "I'm sure you are," Mabel said. She did not stand to show them out. When the buggy had gone from the yard and the sound of it had faded down the road, Colton sat at the kitchen table and was quiet for a long moment. "You should have told me about Price," Mabel said. "I didn't think he was relevant," Colton said. "He is very relevant," she said. "He and Whitmore are working together. Whitmore manufactures the pressure. Price appears with the solution. That's the whole mechanism." Colton looked at the card on the table. "I know that now." "You suspected it before," she said. He was quiet. "Colton." She waited until he looked at her. "I cannot help you if you don't tell me things. I am not asking to be consulted about everything. I'm asking that when something touches on what we're already fighting, you tell me." He held her gaze. "You're right," he said, which cost him something. She could see that, but he said it cleanly. "I should have." She nodded. "The petition needs to go in today," she said. "Not at the end of the week. Today." He stood up. "I'll ride to town." "We'll ride to town," she said. He did not argue. Dale Marsh was not what Mabel had imagined. She had pictured, based on Martha's description of a former clergyman turned county commissioner, a careful, soft-handed man with the deliberate manner of someone practiced in saying difficult things gently. What she found instead was a compact, direct person in his 60s with a handshake that meant it, and eyes that looked at you as though they were interested in what they found. He read the petition in front of them, which she had not expected. She had assumed he would take it and say he would review it. And he read it thoroughly, turning back twice to cross-reference sections. And when he was done, he set it on his desk and looked at Mabel. "You wrote this," he said. It was not a question. "We wrote it together," she said. "The structure is yours," he said. Colton said nothing, which she appreciated. "There are 5 complainants," Marsh said, including Agnes Fitch, who has already signed a transfer of land. "Agnes's situation is part of the pattern," Mabel said. "The transfer under duress is relevant to the Commission's understanding of the timeline." "Whitmore will say it was voluntary," Marsh said. "Whitmore will say everything was voluntary," Mabel said. "That's what makes the pattern important. 1 voluntary dispute is a misunderstanding. 5, in 8 months, with the same assessment officer and the same missing documentation, is something else." Marsh tapped the petition with 2 fingers. "Hal Briggs is going to oppose this," he said. Whitmore's brother-in-law, she knew. "He'll want a delay, and then another delay, and then he'll try to get it referred to the territorial office, which takes it out of my jurisdiction." "How long do we have before he can do that?" she asked. If we schedule the hearing within the statutory window, he can't refer it before the hearing happens, Marsh said. But he'll find another angle. He always does, Colton said from the chair beside Mabel's. Marsh looked at him. You've dealt with Briggs before. Once, Colton said. Water rights dispute 2 years back. He ruled in favor of the caraway spread. I don't know if it was wrong or just wrong for me. It was wrong, Marsh said, which was not the kind of thing a sitting commissioner said about a fellow commissioner as a matter of routine. He said it without heat, the way he might have said it was cold outside. Mabel liked him considerably. Will you schedule the hearing? She asked. Marsh picked up the petition again. I'll need the witness accounts in writing. All of them, including Harker's. They're being written now, she said. You'll have them by Friday. He looked at her again, that direct, interested look. Mrs. Hayes, he said. How long have you been in Montana? 7 weeks, she said. He smiled, the kind of smile that reached the eyes and meant something. Well, he said. Welcome. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Mabel's time at Hayes Valley Ranch, and the ranch had already provided her with a generous education in what a long 2 weeks felt like. The witness accounts came in. Harker's was first, clear and detailed, and signed in a hand so firm it was almost aggressive, as though he'd decided that every letter was a rebuttal to something. Porter's came next, terse and precise, the account of a man who had made himself sit still long enough to put things in order. Deer's was longer, more narrative, and she edited it gently for clarity before it went to Marsh with Deer's permission. Agnes Fitch's took the most time. Agnes came to the ranch on a Thursday afternoon and sat at the kitchen table and told Mabel what she remembered, and Mabel wrote it down, and Agnes read it back and said, That's right, that's all of it, in the quiet voice of someone who had been holding something down for a while. While all of this was happening, the ranch still ran. Colton rode fence line and managed the hands, and did the 100 things a ranch required in fall as it moved toward winter. Billy kept the horses in shape and fixed 2 things that broke, and 1 thing that had been on the edge of breaking since summer. Martha managed the house with her characteristic authority and kept Mabel fed at times when Mabel forgot to eat. Emma, who had no interest in land fraud or county commissions, learned to pull herself upright holding the leg of the kitchen table and fell down approximately 40 times and got back up 40 times, and Mabel watched this and thought, yes, exactly, so. On a Tuesday, 11 days before the hearing, Whitmore made a move she had not anticipated. He came to the ranch himself, which was the part she had not expected. She had assumed he would work through Price or through letters or through the machinery of the county office. Instead, he came in his own buggy in the late afternoon, and he was alone, and he was not pleasant the way Price was pleasant. He was something more careful than that. He asked for Colton and got Mabel, which she could see cost him an adjustment. I was hoping to speak with your husband, he said, standing in the yard. He's in the barn, she said. I can get him, or you can speak with me. We handle the ranch's affairs together. This was a statement of intent as much as fact. Whitmore looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalculating. Come in, she said. I'll get coffee. He came in. Colton appeared from the barn within a few minutes. Billy had gone for him, using the particular efficiency he had when he understood a situation without being told, and came into the kitchen without appearing to hurry, which was, she had come to understand, one of Colton Hayes' particular gifts. He was never seen to rush. Whitmore did not open with the land matter. He opened with the weather and the winter coming and the state of the road from town, and Mabel sat at the table and watched him and understood that the pleasantries were not pleasantries. They were a measurement. He was taking the temperature of the room, deciding how to approach what he had actually come to say. He got there after about 4 minutes. I've become aware of the petition to the commission, he said. Yes, Colton said. I think there may have been some miscommunication about the nature of the assessment, Whitmore said carefully. These things happen. Records get confused. My payment receipt went missing from this desk, Colton said, after your man came through for the assessment walk. Whitmore's face did not change. I can't speak to what might have happened with individual documents, he said. What I can say is that I'd like to resolve this without it becoming a matter of public record. It's already a matter of public record, Mabel said. We filed the petition 10 days ago. Whitmore looked at her. There may be room for a revised assessment, he said, for several of the properties involved. if the petition were withdrawn. The kitchen was quiet. Mabel looked at Colton. Colton was looking at Whitmore with the expression she had come to think of as his listening face. Not agreeable, not hostile, simply fully present in the way of someone who was hearing exactly what was being said and what was under it. "You're offering to give us back what you took," Colton said, "if we agree to let you keep taking it from the next person." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "I'm offering a resolution." "The commission hearing is a resolution," Mabel said. "A public one with documentation that establishes a record." She paused. "A private agreement that disappears after we sign it is not a resolution. It's a postponement." "Mrs. Hayes," Whitmore said, and his voice had taken on a quality she recognized. "The patience of a man who is about to stop being patient. This will be harder for all of you than you're anticipating." "Probably," she said. "Most things are." He looked at Colton. "Hayes, you've got a new wife and a young child. This is not the time to be taking on fights you might not win." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. Colton sat very still. She watched something move behind his eyes, something old and private that she did not know well enough yet to read, and she sat still and let him find his own way to it. "Mr. Whitmore," he said finally, "I've buried a wife on this land, and I've kept this ranch through 4 bad winters and a flooding spring. I know what it costs to hold something." He paused. "Get off my property." Whitmore stood. He was still managing his expression, but the management was showing strain. "You'll regret this," he said. "Might," Colton said, "but not for the reason you think." After Whitmore's buggy had gone, Colton stood in the yard for a moment, and Mabel stood in the kitchen doorway, and the evening came down gray and cold around them. "He's going to try something before the hearing," Colton said, not turning around. "I know," she said. "I don't know what it'll be." "Neither do I," she said, "but Marsh has the petition and the accounts, and that doesn't go away." He turned around. He looked tired in a way that was not physical, the look of someone who had been holding a particular kind of tension for a long time and was only now letting himself notice it. "I keep thinking about what he said," Colton said, "about you and Emma." "Don't," she said. "Mabel, don't," she said again, more gently. "He said it because he wanted it to work. He wanted you to feel like fighting. This was a risk to us." She paused. "The only thing that's a risk to us is losing what's ours. That's what we're fighting for." He looked at her for a long moment. The yard was going dark around him, and the first stars were showing up in the east, and Emma was making sounds in the kitchen behind her, the determined sounds of a baby who had found something interesting and was committed to exploring it. "Where did you come from?" he said, and it was not the question it might have been from someone else. It was the quiet, slightly bewildered question of a man who had not expected to find himself standing in his own yard feeling grateful and did not entirely know what to do with that. "Illinois," she said. He almost smiled. She was learning where the almost smiles lived on his face, the small geography of them. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." He came inside. Whitmore's move came 4 days before the hearing, and it was not what she had expected. She had expected something legal or something procedural. Another letter, a referral attempt, some mechanism of the official machinery he had so far used well. What came instead was personal. A woman arrived at the ranch on a Saturday morning. She was well dressed in the way of someone who was not wealthy but was careful, and she had the face of someone who had been told what to say and was not entirely comfortable saying it. She asked for Mabel by name, which was the first thing that told Mabel something was wrong. Her name was Mrs. Corradell. She was from Billings. She had, she said, a matter of some delicacy to discuss. Mabel brought her inside. Martha disappeared in the direction of the barn, which meant she recognized the woman, or recognized the type, and was giving them privacy. Corradell sat at the kitchen table and folded her hands and said, "I was acquainted with Thomas Briggs." The name landed like a stone in still water. "In what way?" Mabel said, and her voice was steady because she had years of practice making her voice do that. "He's been living in Billings for the past 2 years, Corradell said. He has made certain claims." "About Emma," Mabel said. Corradell looked uncomfortable. "He has spoken to certain people about the child. There are those who have suggested that he might, in the right circumstances, contest the the question of the child's status. Mabel understood exactly what was happening. Thomas Briggs had either been found or had found someone willing to find him, and he had been pointed at her life like a problem that needed complicating. Thomas Briggs left before Emma was born, Mabel said. He left without any legal proceeding, without providing support, without any communication of any kind. Yes, Corridell said. She looked genuinely unhappy. I know. I want you to know that I did not come here willingly. I was asked to come. Mabel looked at her. Who asked you? Corridell was quiet. Mrs. Dell, Mabel said. I am not angry with you. I can see you don't want to be here, but I need to know who sent you. Corridell looked at her hands. A man named Price, she said. He said it was a business matter. He didn't explain what the business was. Price. Of course. Mabel sat back in her chair and thought for a moment, not about Thomas Briggs, who was and always had been a man who made poor choices consistently, but about the design of what had just been laid in front of her. The land matter had not been enough. Whitmore and Price, seeing the petition taking shape and the hearing approaching, had gone looking for a different kind of pressure. And they had found Thomas Briggs and whatever Thomas Briggs was willing to say in exchange for whatever they'd offered him. It was sophisticated, in a brutal sort of way. It was not aimed at the petition. It was aimed at her. Mrs. Dell, Mabel said. Will you tell me exactly what you were told to say? Corridell told her. It took about 3 minutes. When she was done, she looked like a woman who had set down something she was relieved to be without. Thank you, Mabel said. I mean that. I know it wasn't easy to come here. I'm sorry, Corridell said. You don't need to be, Mabel said. You were used. That's not the same as being wrong. She showed Corridell out and stood in the yard and watched the buggy go down the road, and then stood for a moment longer, because she needed a moment before she went inside and told Colton. The sky above the Montana prairie was immense and gray and indifferent, and she stood under it and breathed and thought about Thomas Briggs and Billings, who had done very little in his life to deserve the leverage someone had just handed him. Then she went inside. Colton's reaction was not what she had feared. She had feared, and she recognized this was not rational, or not entirely, but fear was rarely either, that something about Thomas Briggs's existence would change things. That the reappearance of Emma's father, even as a tool of manipulation, would introduce a complication into the particular careful thing she and Colton had been building. That he would recalculate. He didn't recalculate. He sat at the kitchen table and listened to everything she said, and when she was done, he was quiet for a moment and then said, What does he actually want? Briggs. I don't know yet, she said. I don't think he wants Emma. I think someone offered him something and he said yes. Money, Colton said. Probably. Can he do anything? He said. Legally. He abandoned her before she was born, Mabel said. He made no claim. In most territories, that significantly limits his standing. She paused. But a legal challenge, even a weak one, costs time and money and creates exactly the kind of disruption that Price is looking for. He doesn't need to win. He just needs to make things complicated enough that we lose focus before the hearing. Colton was quiet. I've been in this county 8 weeks, Mabel said. I don't know a lawyer here. I do, Colton said. She looked at him. There's a man in Miles City named Harris, he said. He handled Clara's estate. He's thorough, and he doesn't like being wrong. He stood up. I'll go Monday. Colton. She waited until he looked at her. Emma is my daughter. This is my fight. It's our family, he said very simply, and picked up his hat. She sat with that for a moment after he'd gone out to the barn. Our family. 2 words he had said, the way you said a thing that was true, not the way you said a thing you were hoping to make true. Emma was on her blanket on the floor, engaged in the serious project of trying to fit a wooden spoon into a wooden cup, a project that was not going well but that she was committed to with everything she had. Mabel watched her daughter and thought about a man in Billings who had walked away, and a man in the barn who had stayed, and the profound difference between the two. Emma tried again. Bus. On the Monday before the hearing, 3 things happened. The first was that Colton came back from Miles City with Harris's assessment, which was that Thomas Briggs had no legal standing to contest Emma's status under current territorial law given the circumstances of his departure. and that any attempt to claim otherwise would require Briggs to appear in court and explain, under oath, why he had waited nearly a year after his daughter's birth to express any interest in her existence. Harris was confident. Harris was also the kind of confident that came from having read everything, not from optimism. The second was that Porter rode out with news that 2 other ranchers in the county, men who had not been at the Monday meeting, had come to him independently to report similar assessment discrepancies. The pattern was wider than they had thought. The third was a letter from Vera Langston, addressed to Colton, which he read and which he handed to Mabel without comment. The letter was not cruel exactly. It was the kind of letter that a woman writes when she has decided to be gracious about a situation she does not accept, all smooth surfaces and careful language. It suggested that Colton might want to reconsider certain associations that were creating difficulties for him. It expressed concern, in the warmest possible terms, for his welfare and the welfare of the ranch. It did not mention Mabel by name. It did not need to. Mabel read it and handed it back. "What do you want to do with it?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "She might be useful as an enemy," Mabel said, "if we know she's one." He looked at her. "She's already an enemy," he said. "She just doesn't think I've noticed." "Have you written back?" "I'm not going to," he said. "All right," Mabel said. He looked at her for a moment with that look she was learning to read, the look that happened when he was about to say something that didn't come easy to him. You're not bothered by it." "By Vera Langston?" she said. "No. Most women would be." "I'm sure that's true," she said, "but I know what she is and I know what you are, and I know what this is between us, and she doesn't change any of those things." She paused. "She wants to matter more than she does. I'm not going to help her with that." He stood for a moment with the letter in his hand, and then he put it in the stove. Mabel went back to what she had been doing, which was going over the petition one final time, checking every line, every name, every date, because in 3 days they were going to walk into a room with Whitmore and Briggs on one side and Marsh and a public record on the other, and she intended for every word of that petition to hold. Outside, the Montana wind was picking up, the first real voice of winter coming down from the north. Inside, the lamp was burning. She kept working. The morning of the hearing, Mabel woke before the lamp was necessary and lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the ranch breathe. Emma was asleep in the crib by the window. Outside, the wind that had been building all week had settled into something quieter, a low, persistent cold that pressed against the glass without drama. She got up and dressed in the dark, moving carefully so she wouldn't wake Emma, and went to the kitchen and started the stove. Her hands were steady. She noticed that specifically, her hands were steady, because she had half expected them not to be. Colton came in from the barn at first light the way he always did, smelling of horses and cold air, and stopped when he saw she was already at the stove. "You slept," he said. It was not quite a question. "Some," she said. He went to the wash basin. "Martha's going to take Emma to Harker's wife in town," he said, "so she's not sitting in the hall all morning." Mabel had not arranged this, which meant Colton had. She turned back to the stove and did not say anything about it, because saying something about it would have made it smaller than it was. "Harris will meet us at the commission building at 9, Colton said. "I know," she said. "Porter and Deere are coming. Agnes, too." "I know." He was quiet for a moment, drying his hands. "You eat something," he said. "I'm not hungry." "Eat something anyway," he said. "It's going to be a long morning." She put biscuits on the table and sat across from him and ate one, and drank her coffee and did not taste any of it, but she ate it, because he was right that it was going to be a long morning, and because being told to eat something and eating it was, she had come to understand one of the minor languages of this marriage, one of the small ways they said things they were not yet ready to say directly. The Miles City County Commission building was a 2-story structure on the main street that had the architectural confidence of an institution that expected to be permanent. The hearing room was on the ground floor. Long wooden benches, a raised platform with 3 chairs for the commissioners, tall windows that let in a flat winter light. It was not quite full when they arrived, but it was fuller than Mabel had expected. Porter was there with 2 of his hands. Deere was there. Agnes Fitch sat in the second row with her coat buttoned to her throat and her hands folded in her lap, and the expression of a woman who had decided she was done being quietly accommodating. Harker was there. The 2 additional ranchers Porter had mentioned, men named Sutter and Graves, whom Mabel was meeting for the first time, sat together near the back with the careful posture of people who hadn't quite committed to being there but were there. On the other side of the aisle, Whitmore sat with a lawyer Mabel had not seen before, a thin man with a briefcase who had the look of someone brought in specifically for this occasion. Beside them sat Hal Briggs, the commissioner, who was not supposed to be in the public gallery since he was scheduled to sit on the panel, but who was apparently reviewing papers with Whitmore's lawyer in a way that he seemed to consider preliminary rather than improper. Mabel noticed this. Harris noticed it too, and made a note on his paper. Lawrence Price was not in the room. She had not expected him to be. Men like Price did not appear at public hearings. They waited outside and knew the result before it was announced. Thomas Briggs was not in the room either, which was its own kind of information. She had not known until this moment whether she expected him to come. Some part of her had been braced for it. The particular specific shock of seeing a face you had organized your life around not seeing. But the bench where he might have been was empty, and she felt something she could not entirely name, not relief exactly, but a clearing, a space opening up where she had been unconsciously armoring herself. "He's not here," Colton said quietly beside her. "No," she said. "Does that change anything?" "Not legally," she said. "Harris said his presence wasn't necessary for the land matter. They were keeping them separate." "That's not what I asked," Colton said. She looked at him. His face was the careful neutral he wore in rooms where he did not know all the variables, but his eyes were asking something specific and personal, and she understood that he was not asking about legal strategy. "No," she said. "It doesn't change anything." He nodded once and looked back at the front of the room. Dale Marsh entered the hearing room at 9:02 with the unhurried certainty of a man who had been punctual his entire life and had decided that 2 minutes was within acceptable parameters. He took the center chair on the platform. Nate Calloway, the second commissioner, took the chair to his left, a rangy, sun-weathered man in his 50s who had the expression of someone reserving judgment and the body language of someone who was not sure he'd been given the full picture. Hal Briggs took the third chair, to Marsh's right, and arranged his papers with the deliberate attention of a man who knew he was being watched and was comfortable with it. Mabel studied the three of them. Marsh she was counting on. Calloway was the question. Briggs was the obstacle. And the question was how large an obstacle he intended to be. Marsh opened the session with the practiced brevity of someone who had run enough of these to know that preamble served no one. He stated the matter before the commission, a formal petition regarding assessment irregularities in 5 properties across the county submitted by Colton Hayes of Hayes Valley Ranch et al. And he stated the procedure they would follow, and he looked out at the room with the level attention of someone who was going to be fair whether or not anyone was expecting it. "Mr. Hayes," Marsh said, "your counsel will present." Harris stood. He was a different person in the hearing room than he had been in his office. In his office, he had been precise, methodical, occasionally dry. Here he was, all of those things, and also something more deliberate, the particular focus of a man who understood that what he said in the next hour would be in a permanent record. He began with Harker. The feed store owner took the stand and told what he knew, which was this. He had been present in October when Colton Hayes came to him after paying at the land office, and they had discussed the assessment, and Hayes had shown him the receipt and commented on the amount. And the receipt had carried the date and stamp of the Miles City office. He was certain of the date because his own quarterly payment was due the same week, and he had been keeping careful track. Whitmore's lawyer, whose name was Fennell, and who had the cross-examination style of a man who believed that volume was a substitute for precision, went after the memory question. How certain was Harker? Months had passed. Memories were imperfect. Harker looked at Fennell with the patience of someone being asked if he was sure the sun had come up yesterday. "I'm certain," he said. "You can't produce the receipt yourself," Fennell said. "I don't have Hayes's paperwork," Harker said. "Hayes does." "Or he did." Marsh made a note. Agnes Fitch was next, and she was the witness Mabel had thought most about. Agnes was not legally trained, and she was not naturally combative, and she had already been through the experience of losing her field and had not fought it, which Fennell was going to use. But Agnes had something Harker and the others didn't have, which was that she had already been through it. She was the endpoint of what Whitmore's method produced, and the room could see that in her face if they were paying attention. She sat down and answered Harris's questions in a flat, factual voice that did not perform injury, which made the injury more visible. She described the assessment visit. She described the letter. She described the second letter with the increased amount. She described the moment she understood she could not fight it alone and did not know who to talk to and signed the papers because she did not know what else to do. "Mrs. Fitch," Harris said, "were you aware at the time you signed the transfer that other property owners in this county had received similar letters?" "I was not," she said. "When did you become aware?" "When Mrs. Hayes came to see me," she said. The room was quiet for a moment. Fennell rose for cross-examination and made the argument Mabel had expected, that Agnes Fitch had signed the transfer of her own free will, that she had been under no coercion, that her personal feeling of pressure was not the same thing as actual pressure. Agnes let him finish. "My husband built that ranch," she said when Fennell paused. "He is buried on it. I did not want to give up that field. I gave it up because a man came with official papers and an official title and told me I owed money I did not believe I owed, and I had no one to help me understand what my options were." She paused. "You're right that no one held a gun. That's not the only way to take something from someone." The room was quiet again. Marsh wrote something. Calloway was watching Agnes with an expression that had moved past neutral. Briggs was looking at his papers. The testimony from Porter and Deere established the pattern with the methodical weight of evidence that doesn't need to be dramatic because it is already damning. 2 more ranchers, the same assessment officer, the same missing receipts, the same timeline. Sutter and Graves, the ranchers from the back of the room who had come with Porter's encouragement, had not been scheduled to testify but had brought their own letters, and Harris requested permission to enter these as additional evidence. Marsh granted it over Fennell's objection with a brevity that told Mabel everything about which direction he was reading. Briggs objected to the additional evidence on procedural grounds. Marsh overruled him. Calloway looked at Briggs sideways in the way of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion he had been carrying for a while. Whitmore's lawyer rose for his presentation and made the argument that had been available to him from the beginning, which was the only argument available, that the missing receipts were a coincidence, that the assessment revisions were legitimate and had been applied consistently across the county, that the complainants were engaged in a coordinated effort to challenge the proper authority of the land office, and that the emotional testimony of ranchers who were frustrated with their tax burdens should not be confused with evidence of malfeasance. It was not a bad argument if you had nothing to set it against. The problem was that Harris had spent 2 weeks building exactly the thing to set it against, which was a documented timeline that showed the assessment revisions had not been applied consistently across the county, but had been applied specifically to properties with features that made them attractive. Water access, grazing land, strategic location relative to roads and town. And then a representative of the Territorial Land Consortium had appeared at those properties with offers to purchase. He put Colton on the stand last. Colton was not a natural witness in the sense of someone comfortable being in front of people and being asked to speak. He was a natural witness in the sense of someone whose plainness made it impossible to dismiss. He said what he knew. He said it without decoration. He described the payment, the assessment walk, the missing receipt, Whitmore's visit to the ranch, and Price's offer. "Mr. Hayes," Harris said, "did Mr. Price of the Territorial Land Consortium indicate to you any connection between the assessment matter and his interest in purchasing the east section of your property?" "He said the consortium was prepared to offer a resolution," Colton said, "given the uncertainty about the title situation. And the consortium's offer to purchase came after the assessment letter." "Several months after," Colton said, "and again after the second letter." No further questions. Fennell rose. "Mr. Hayes, you have no documentation connecting Mr. Whitmore to Mr. Price." "I have them both in my kitchen," Colton said. "That is not the same thing as a documented connection." "No," Colton said. "It's not." He looked at Fennell steadily. "But my wife does." Mabel had not been scheduled to testify. This was a deliberate decision she and Harris had made together based on the calculation that the commission needed to see the pattern established through the people who had been directly affected, and that introducing her would give Fennell the opportunity to make the case that she was the architect of a personal campaign rather than a witness to facts. She had agreed with this logic, and she had sat in the second row all morning and watched it unfold and had not said a word. When Colton said, "My wife does," Fennell turned to look at her, and something in his expression told her he had not been expecting this. Harris stood. The petitioners request permission to enter one additional item of evidence, he said, and handed Marsh a document. It was the letter from Cora Dell. Not the letter Cora Dell had brought to the ranch. Mabel had no letter to show since Cora Dell had spoken, but Mabel had, 2 days after Cora Dell's visit, written to her in Billings, asking a single direct question. Would she put in writing what she had told Mabel at the ranch, and specifically who had sent her and why? Cora Dell had written back. The letter had arrived yesterday. Mabel had sat with it in the kitchen for a long time before she showed it to Harris. It was not, Harris had said, evidence of land fraud. It was evidence of something else, of a concerted effort to intimidate a petitioner using personal information orchestrated by Lawrence Price of the Territorial Land Consortium in the days before a formal county commission hearing. It was evidence of the kind of coordination that a man did not engage in unless the stakes were high enough to justify the risk. Marsh read the letter. He read it twice. His expression did not change in any dramatic way, but something behind his eyes went very still. He handed it to Calloway. Calloway read it and set it down and looked at the front of the room without any particular expression, but he had stopped looking at his papers and had not looked at Briggs since mid-morning. Briggs reached for the letter. Marsh moved it slightly. "We'll discuss this in deliberation," Marsh said. The deliberation took 40 minutes, which was long enough for the room to thin and refill with speculation, and long enough for Mabel to drink 2 cups of water and walk to the window and watch the street outside and think about nothing in particular, which was the only thing available to her. Agnes Fitch sat beside her on the bench and said nothing for a long time, and then said, "Do you think it'll hold?" "I think it holds or it doesn't," Mabel said. "We did what we could do." "That's not very reassuring," Agnes said. "No," Mabel said, "it's not." Agnes made the almost laugh sound. "I didn't expect you to be easy to talk to," she said. "When Colton first wrote that he was taking a mail-order bride, Martha wrote me about it." Mabel looked at her. "Martha wrote you?" "Martha writes everyone," Agnes said with the tone of a county-wide fact. "What did she say?" "She said she didn't know what to make of you," Agnes said. "She said you went to work on the garden your second morning before anyone told you to." She paused. "She said that was probably a good sign." Mabel looked back at the window. "High praise from Martha." "Highest I've heard her give," Agnes said. Porter came over and said the deliberation was usually an hour minimum on something like this, and they should get coffee from the place down the street, and Agnes said she would, and Mabel said she would stay. Colton was across the room talking to Harris, and she watched him without appearing to watch him, the way she had learned to do, the way you watched someone you were still learning. He had set our family in the kitchen 4 days ago. She was still carrying that, the weight of it, the careful way she'd picked it up and held it without squeezing too hard. The commission came back after 53 minutes. The room was full again. Mabel was in her seat. Colton had come back across the room and was sitting beside her, and he had not planned this or announced it. He had simply moved from where he'd been standing to the seat beside her, and the specific plainness of that act had done something to the armor she kept around the parts of her she was still learning to trust. Marsh looked out at the room and waited for it to settle. "The commission has reviewed the petition, the witness testimonies, and the documentary evidence submitted in this proceeding," he said. "I will state the findings directly." Briggs had his pen ready. Calloway was looking at Marsh. "The commission finds that the pattern of assessment revisions documented in this petition represents an irregularity that cannot be attributed to administrative error," Marsh said. "The specificity of the properties affected, the timing of the revisions, and the documented involvement of an external commercial interest in the subsequent purchase offers constitute a matter requiring remedy." The room was not quite quiet. There was a sound that moved through it, not loud, the sound of people exhaling. "The commission finds in favor of the petitioners," Marsh said. "The assessment revisions are hereby suspended pending a full audit of the land office records by an independent officer appointed by the territorial government. All properties named in the petition are to be held at their original assessed values until the audit is complete. Any transfers of property completed under the disputed assessments are subject to review." Agnes Fitch made a sound beside Mabel, a brief, involuntary sound, quickly controlled. Briggs put his pen down. He made to speak, and Marsh looked at him, a very direct look, and he stopped. "The commission further finds," Marsh said, that the evidence submitted regarding the involvement of the Territorial Land Consortium in efforts to intimidate a named petitioner will be referred to the Territorial Attorney's Office for review. He paused. This hearing is concluded. The room broke into the particular organized confusion that follows a verdict, people standing and talking and gathering their coats, and Mabel sat still in the middle of it for a moment because she needed a moment before she could stand up and be in it. Colton's hand found hers under the edge of the bench. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. His hand was rough and warm, and he held hers with the same careful pressure he had used at the ceremony, the hold of someone who was not sure he was allowed but was doing it anyway. She turned her hand and held back. Harris came over and said something practical about next steps and the audit process and what to expect from the territorial office. And she heard him and nodded and filed it away for later because later was when she would be able to think about it properly. Porter shook Colton's hand and nodded at Mabel with an expression that had abandoned most of its guardedness. Dear looked relieved in the specific way of someone who had not fully believed things would work and was now recalibrating. Agnes stood near the window with her coat buttoned and her eyes bright in a way that she was not going to acknowledge directly, because Agnes Fitch had 3 years of practice not acknowledging things directly. Mabel went to her. "Your field," she said. "The transfer review. Harris thinks—" "I know what Harris thinks," Agnes said. "I heard." She looked at Mabel. "I'm not counting on it." "That's fair," Mabel said. "But I'm not counting on it either," Agnes said, which was the most hopeful thing Agnes Fitch had said in what was probably a long time, and they both understood that, and they stood by the window together for a moment in the cold winter light. Whitmore left the building without speaking to anyone, which was information. Fennell packed his briefcase with the efficiency of a man who billed by the hour and had no further hours to bill. Briggs spoke to no one and looked at no one and went out the side door, and Mabel watched him go and thought that whatever came next for Hal Briggs was between him and the territorial office, and that was as it should be. She did not see Price. She had not seen him all day. Men like Price were patient, as he had said himself, and he would find another angle, another county, another set of properties with attractive water access, and there would be another Whitmore in place and another set of letters with official seals. She knew this. She did not think the hearing had ended anything beyond this particular fight, in this particular county, for these particular people. That was enough. It had to be. They rode home in the late afternoon, the light going low and golden over the grass, and Emma was on Mabel's lap because Martha's arrangement with Harker's wife had included the return trip, and the baby was awake and alert and interested in the horse's ears and the color of the sky and the particular fascinating texture of Mabel's coat buttons, in the way that babies were interested in everything with the same democratic intensity. Colton drove. He had been quiet since the hearing room, the good kind of quiet, not the held-in kind. After a while he said, "Marsh will do right by the audit." "I think so too," Mabel said. "Calloway surprised me," he said. "He surprised me too," she said. "I think Briggs surprised him. I think he'd been watching Briggs for a while and today confirmed something." Colton was quiet again for a bit. "Price will try again," he said. "Not here," she said. "Not for a while. The referral to the territorial office makes it too expensive." "For a while," he repeated. "Yes," she said. "For a while is what we got." He nodded. He seemed to be thinking about that, about the nature of "for a while," about what it meant to win a fight that wasn't entirely finished. She understood this because she was thinking about it too. "It's enough," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Emma grabbed his sleeve, which she had recently discovered was within reach when Mabel held her in the front of the buckboard, and she held on with the grip that never failed to surprise adults, the fierce, uncalculated grip of someone who had no ambivalence about what she wanted to hold. Colton looked down at her hand on his sleeve. He did not shift away. He did not reposition Emma's hand or redirect her attention. He drove the horses with one hand and left his other sleeve in Emma's grip, and the buckboard moved through the fading afternoon light of the Montana prairie. And the ranch was ahead of them, home ahead of them, and none of it was what Mabel had planned or what she had let herself imagine in the worst months in Hargrove. But it was real, which was better than planned. It was hers, which was better than imagined. Martha had supper on when they arrived, which meant Martha had assumed they would be coming home, which meant Martha had assumed they would win, which was either confidence or stubbornness or both. and was entirely in character. She did not say anything about the outcome when they came in. She put food on the table and poured coffee and said the kitchen garden's south row needed attention before the ground froze, and she had noticed it from the window that afternoon. "I'll look at it tomorrow," Mabel said. Martha nodded as though that resolved the matter. Billy came in for supper, which had become his habit, the slow, informal adoption of a boy who had been eating in the bunkhouse alone since spring, and he helped himself to what Martha put out and ate with the focused energy of a 16-year-old who was always slightly behind on calories, and when he'd taken the edge off, he said, "How'd it go?" To no one in particular, and to both of them at once. "Commission ruled in our favor," Colton said. Billy looked up. Something moved across his face, something young and quick. Relief, Mabel thought, genuine relief. The kind you felt when something you had been quietly worried about turned out all right. "Good," he said, and went back to eating. That was all. Good. And that was right, Mabel thought. That was exactly the right word for it. The right size of word. Not too much, not triumphant, not dramatic. Just good. They had done the thing they needed to do, and now they could get back to the business of the ranch and the winter and the kitchen garden and the horse that Billy had been nursing through a sore foreleg for 2 weeks. After supper, after Billy had gone back to the bunkhouse, and Martha had gone to her room, and Colton had gone out for a last check of the animals, Mabel sat at the kitchen table with Emma on her knee and the lamp burning low and the stove warm against the coming cold of the night. Emma was fighting sleep with the whole-body commitment of a child who suspected that interesting things happened after dark and was unwilling to risk missing them. Her eyes were heavy and kept closing and kept opening again, and Mabel sat and held her and waited, because this was one of the things nobody told you about having a child. How much of it was just waiting, just holding, just being present for the slow process of another person finding their way to whatever came next. She thought about the petition and the hearing room, and Agnes Fitch's almost laugh, and Colton's hand under the bench. She thought about Cora Dell's letter, and Thomas Briggs sitting somewhere in Billings having agreed to a thing and then apparently decided not to follow through on it, and she felt something that was not forgiveness because she was not ready for that, and might never be, but was something more useful. Indifference, maybe. The clean, specific freedom of someone who has decided that a person has no more power over them. She thought about Clara Hayes, buried somewhere on this land, a woman she would never know who had made this place make sense once, and she held that thought with a care she would not have known how to explain. She was not Clara. She was not here to replace Clara. She was here to be Mabel Hayes, which was its own project, still under construction, still finding its shape. The door opened and Colton came in from the cold, and Emma turned her heavy-eyed face toward the sound with the particular attention she always gave him. She had from the beginning, from that first day in the kitchen when she had grabbed his finger, as though she had assessed the situation and decided. He looked at the two of them at the table and stopped in the doorway for a moment, and his face did the thing it did, the thing that lived next to a smile. He came in and closed the door against the cold. "She's still fighting it?" he said, nodding at Emma. "She always fights it," Mabel said. "She'll be out in 5 minutes." He sat down across from them and poured himself coffee from the pot that was still warm and looked at Emma, who was looking back at him with the drowsy gravity of someone conducting the last interview of a long day. "What happens tomorrow?" he said. "With the audit, with Harris." "Tomorrow we wait," Mabel said. "Harris will send word when the territorial officer is appointed. Could be 2 weeks, could be a month." She paused. "We go back to the ranch." He nodded. "Back to the ranch," he said, as though the phrase was a thing you could hold in your hands. Emma's eyes closed. They opened halfway. Closed again. The fire in the stove crackled once and settled. Outside, the Montana night was enormous and cold and full of wind, and inside the lamp was burning, and something that had started in a train car with a woman who had $12 and a sleeping baby and a worn photograph was here now. Settled, imperfect, real, beginning, not finished, not neat, but deeply, stubbornly, earning its way every day alive. The audit took 6 weeks. Mabel knew this because she counted them. Not obsessively, not with marks on a wall, but in the way you count things when the outcome of something matters, and there is nothing left to do about it except wait. 6 weeks of ordinary ranch life moving over the top of an extraordinary uncertainty, the way weather moves over ground that is still shifting underneath. The territorial officer arrived in Miles City on a Tuesday in early December, a precise, thin-faced man named Aldous Kemp, who had apparently audited 3 county land offices in the past 2 years and had the demeanor of someone who had seen enough irregularity that nothing surprised him anymore. Harris sent word when Kemp arrived. Harris sent word again when Kemp began pulling records. After that there was silence, which Harris said was normal and which felt, in the kitchen of Hayes Valley Ranch, like the specific silence of something that could still go either way. Colton did not talk about the audit. This was not unusual. Colton did not talk about most things that were unresolved, operating on the practical theory that discussing what you couldn't yet change was a use of words that didn't justify itself. Mabel had come to understand this about him, and she did not push. She had her own version of the same instinct, learned in harder circumstances. Save the energy for when there's something to spend it on. What they did instead was winter. There was enough of it to do. The north fence line needed 2 sections replaced before the deep cold arrived. The root cellar needed organizing, a project Martha had been mentioning since September, with the patience of someone who knows the work will eventually arrive at them regardless. Billy discovered that one of the barn's support beams had been quietly compromising itself for at least a season, and the repair of it became a 2-week project that pulled Colton and Billy into the barn for most of the daylight hours and produced, as a byproduct, more conversation between the two of them than Mabel had observed in her first 2 months at the ranch combined. She watched this without commenting on it. Billy needed something she was not sure he had a word for. Not a father exactly, because he was old enough to be past needing that in the simple way, but something in that direction. Someone who showed him how to do a thing and expected him to do it right and told him when he had. Colton was not effortful about it. He did not appear to notice he was doing it. But she noticed. Emma, for her part, had developed a comprehensive interest in the barn. This had begun with the horses, which she regarded from a safe distance with an expression of concentrated awe, and had expanded to include the barn cats, the quality of light through the high windows, the smell of hay, and Billy's voice when he talked to the animals, which was different from his voice when he talked to people and which Emma appeared to find deeply interesting. Mabel brought her out in the morning sometimes, bundled to an almost comical degree against the Montana December, and let her watch the work. Colton had begun doing something she had not noticed at first, and then could not stop noticing. He narrated things to Emma. Not in the self-conscious way of an adult performing for a baby, but in the ordinary way of someone who had gotten used to having a small person nearby and had started including her in the running account of the day. That's the roan. She's particular about her left side. Don't approach her from behind. Emma was 9 months old and understood none of this and appeared to consider all of it equally fascinating. Mabel stood in the barn doorway one morning and watched Colton hold Emma up to see over the stall door while he explained something about the horse's winter coat, and she felt something move through her that she had no clean word for, something that was partly gratitude and partly wonder, and partly the ache of a person who had spent a long time being very careful about hope and was finding it increasingly difficult to maintain that carefulness. She was falling in love with her husband. She had not planned for this. She was not sure it was wise, but it was happening with the same quiet insistence as everything else about Hayes Valley Ranch. Not dramatic, not announced, just steadily and undeniably there. Agnes Fitch came for supper on a Thursday in December, which had become something of a habit over the past weeks. Agnes lived close enough to make the trip practical, and far enough away that the company mattered. She and Martha had established the kind of friendship that older women establish when they have decided each other is worth the effort, which involved a certain amount of mutual assessment of the other's opinions and a comprehensive willingness to disagree, and which had produced unexpectedly something warm and reliable. After supper, while Colton and Billy were seeing to the animals and Martha was washing up, Agnes sat across from Mabel at the kitchen table with her tea and said, "I heard something from Marsh." Mabel looked up. "Kemp found the second set of records," Agnes said. Mabel put her cup down. There had been a theory, Harris's theory, built on the specificity of what had been taken and what had been left, that Whitmore had not simply been removing inconvenient documents, but had been maintaining a parallel set of records, a shadow accounting that reflected what he had been telling people they owed rather than what they actually owed. A second set was harder to explain away than missing receipts. A second set was not an administrative error. A second set was a choice. "Marsh told you this?" Mabel said. "He He told me Kemp found discrepancies that support a pattern of intentional alteration, Agnes said carefully, in the tone of someone repeating something they were told to repeat carefully. He didn't say more than that. He said Harris would be in contact. Mabel sat with this. Agnes, she said, your field. Agnes wrapped her hands around her tea. I'm not counting on it, she said, which was what she always said, and which Mabel now recognized as the armor Agnes wore over the thing she was actually counting on, because the armor was the only thing that made the counting bearable. I think you should count on it, Mabel said. Agnes looked at her. I think Kemp found what he found, and I think the Territorial Attorney's Office is going to do something with it, and I think a forced transfer that's documented in a second set of falsified records is exactly the kind of thing that gets reversed, Mabel said. I'm not promising you, I don't know enough to promise, but I think you should count on it. Agnes was quiet for a long moment. Her hands were still around the teacup. You know what the worst part was? She said, not quite asking. Tell me, Mabel said. It wasn't losing the field, Agnes said. It was the feeling afterward, like I had let him do it, like I had made it easier for him than I should have. She paused. My husband would have fought. I know he would have, and I couldn't. You didn't have what you needed to fight, Mabel said. That's not the same as not fighting. Easy to say. No, Mabel said. It's not easy to say. It's true, which is different. She looked at Agnes. You came to our meeting. You gave your testimony. You sat in that hearing room and said what happened plainly in front of Whitmore and his lawyer. That's not nothing. That's not someone who didn't fight. Agnes looked at the table. Then she looked up, and her eyes were bright in the way Mabel had seen in the hearing room, the way she was beginning to recognize as Agnes's version of something she did not have a more comfortable way to show. You're a strange woman, Mabel Hayes, Agnes said. I've been called stranger things, Mabel said. Agnes almost laughed. All the way, this time. Harris's letter came on a Monday. Mabel read it at the kitchen table while Emma played on the floor and the stove burned and the ranch went on its morning business outside. She read it twice, the way she read everything that mattered. Then she put it down and sat for a moment. The Territorial Attorney's Office had accepted Kemp's findings. Whitmore had been suspended from his position pending a formal proceeding. The assessment revisions named in the petition had been vacated, officially, permanently, as a matter of public record. The properties returned to their original assessed values, with restitution of any amounts paid under the fraudulent assessments to be arranged through the Territorial Office. Agnes Fitch's field transfer had been flagged for review, specifically with a recommendation for reversal based on the documented falsification of the records underlying it. It was not entirely over. Proceedings of this kind moved slowly, and Whitmore would have the opportunity to respond, and the restitution process would take months. But the finding was made. The record existed. The thing that Whitmore had been counting on, the absence of a record, the invisibility of the pattern, was gone. Mabel sat at the table until Emma pulled herself upright on the table leg, which she did every morning now with increasing confidence, and demanded attention. She picked up her daughter and held her and thought about a general store in Hargrove, Illinois, and a woman named Ruth Calloway, who had said what she said loudly enough that Mabel could hear it through a wall, and the particular specific sensation of standing there with Emma in her arms and understanding that the ground was gone. The ground was not gone now. The ground was solid under her feet and her daughter's feet and was going to stay there. She put Emma on her hip and went to find Colton. I was at the north fence with Billy, and she walked out to them through the cold with Emma bundled on her hip and Harris's letter in her coat pocket, and Colton saw her coming from a distance and stopped what he was doing and waited, the way he had learned to wait for her. Fully, without fidgeting, the way you waited when you understood that what was coming was worth waiting for properly. She handed him the letter. He read it. Billy, with his characteristic tactical tact, became very interested in the fence post directly to his left. Colton handed the letter back. His face was doing the thing it did. It's done, he said. Mostly, she said. The proceedings take time, but the finding is there. He nodded. He looked out across the east section, the good land, the creek land, the land that Whitmore and Price had wanted and had not gotten, and the winter light was flat and clear over it, and the creek was running dark between its frozen edges. Price will move on, he said. He already has, she said. Harris heard he left the territory. Patient people, Colton said, without particular bitterness, just the observation of a man who understood that certain types persisted. Patient people find patient problems, Mabel said. We weren't patient enough. He looked at her. The almost smile, which she had become something of an expert on, arrived and stayed a moment longer than usual. No, he said, we weren't. Billy coughed in the direction of the fence post. I'm going to write to Agnes, Mabel said. She'll already know, Colton said. Martha will have told her. I know, Mabel said. I'm going to write to her anyway. He picked up his tools. I'll be in for lunch, he said, and went back to the fence. She stood for a moment in the cold with Emma on her hip and looked at the east section, the creek catching light between the ice, and felt something she recognized from a long time ago. From before Hargrove, before Thomas Briggs, before all of it. The specific lightness of a person who is not, for this moment, carrying anything that doesn't belong to them. It didn't last. It never lasted. The cold was real, and the walk back to the house was real, and there was washing to do, and a letter to write, and a daughter to feed. And the weight came back with all of those things, because weight was what life was made of. But for that moment, in the flat winter light of the Montana plains, she stood and let herself be light. Agnes got her field back in February. The reversal came through the territorial office with the quiet efficiency of bureaucracy correcting itself, which was less dramatic than the wrong being done, but was real. Agnes wrote to Mabel when the papers arrived. A short letter, because Agnes was not a long letter writer, but it said what it needed to say, which was, I counted on it like you told me to. I'm glad I did. Mabel kept the letter. She kept it in the small box she had brought from Illinois, the one with the worn photograph and the letter from Colton that had started everything. The child is not a problem. I have room. If you are willing to work hard and mean what you say, come in June. She put Agnes's letter in with those things, because it belonged there, in the box of things that had mattered at the right moment. March brought the mud that Montana spring apparently always brought, a comprehensive and democratic mud that affected everything and everyone equally, and that Billy complained about with the dedicated thoroughness of someone who had found his calling. It also brought the first real warmth, the kind that arrived tentatively at first and then committed. And the kitchen garden that Mabel had salvaged in her first week came back with the stubbornness of things that had been properly cared for, pushing up through the warming ground with an indifference to the winter it had just survived that she found. Every year she would tend a garden, newly remarkable. Emma turned one in April. She was walking by then, had been walking since February, with the particular determined wobble of a person who had decided that crawling was beneath her and was going to get upright and stay upright regardless of the number of times the floor disagreed. She walked toward things she wanted with a focus that Martha said was entirely Mabel, and she stood at the kitchen window watching the horses with a focus that Colton said was something else. The birthday was not a large occasion. Martha made a cake. Billy came in from the barn with a carved wooden horse he had apparently been working on for 2 months in whatever spare moments he had, sanded smooth and carefully shaped, and set it on the table in front of Emma with an expression of studied nonchalance that did not fool anyone. Emma picked up the horse and looked at Billy, and said something that was not quite a word but was clearly directed at him specifically, and Billy's face went red to his ears and he said, "You're welcome," in the general direction of the wall, and Martha laughed outright, which was not a common occurrence and was therefore remarkable. Colton was at the table and Emma was across from him in the chair that had been adjusted to fit her, and he watched her with the horse with an expression that had long since stopped being careful about itself. He watched her the way a person watched something they had stopped pretending they didn't love, because pretending had become more work than the alternative. Mabel watched him watch her daughter. She thought about the yard, the first day, when she had stood with Emma on her hip and braced herself for the face she knew how to read, the face that meant a man was recalculating, deciding the terms weren't what he'd thought, preparing to walk back a promise. She had been so prepared for that face. She had her whole body prepared for it. He had said, "How old?" He had said, "That'll be a problem here too. I wake early." He had built a crib before she arrived and had let his 14-year-old hand know without quite saying so, because Colton Hayes said almost nothing directly when something indirect would do, and Emma had grabbed his finger on the kitchen floor and he had held very still so she could keep her grip, and here was where that had led, 14 months later. A birthday, a wooden horse, a kitchen full of imperfect people who had become, through no particular plan and a significant amount of daily work, a family said. It was Colton who brought it up. Not the feeling. He was not the kind of man who brought up feelings as a category of conversation. He brought up a specific thing in the specific way he had of addressing things that mattered to him by approaching them sideways, practically, through action rather than declaration. It was an evening in May, after Emma was down and Billy had gone to the bunkhouse and Martha had retired, and they were at the kitchen table in the way they were often at the kitchen table in the evenings now. Not always talking, sometimes reading, sometimes working through the ranch accounts, sometimes simply occupying the same space with the ease of people who had stopped needing to fill silence. He set something on the table in front of her. It was a document. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. "Adoption papers," he said. Harris drew them up. She looked back at the document. Formal petition for adoption of Emma Rose Rosewood, to be styled Emma Rose Hayes, by Colton James Hayes of Hayes Valley Ranch, Custer County, Montana Territory. "You went to Harris," she said. "Last week," he said. "You didn't tell me." "I wasn't sure." He stopped. He did the thing he did when he was looking for the right words and not finding them immediately, which was that he picked up something on the table and set it down, the small fidget of a man who was otherwise not a fidgeter. "I wasn't sure you'd want it decided for you," he said. "I wanted to have it so you could decide." She looked at the paper. Emma Rose Hayes. The name sat in her chest like something settling into the right place after a long time in the wrong one. "She won't remember not being Hayes," Mabel said. "No," he said. "She'll grow up thinking it was always her name." "Yes," he said. Mabel looked at him. He was watching her with the direct look, the one that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. A man who had decided something and was waiting to find out if the other person had decided the same thing. "Thomas Briggs never came to the hearing," she said. Not as an objection, just saying it aloud, the thing she had held without saying. "I know," Colton said. "He's not going to contest anything." "I know that too," he said. Harris confirmed it. He paused. "This isn't about him." "No," she said. "It's not." She looked at the paper again. "It's about you choosing her." "I chose her the first morning I saw her pull herself up on that table leg," he said, which was the most words she had heard him say at once on a personal subject in the 8 months she had known him, and she understood what it cost him and what it meant that he paid it anyway. She picked up the pen that he had set beside the paper, which meant he had come to the table with the pen, which meant he had come with some hope of how this conversation went. She signed her name. He signed his. They sat for a moment with the document between them. "Colton," she said. He looked at her. There were things she could have said. She had a better facility with words than he did, had always been the one in this marriage who could find the sentence for a thing. And she had, over 8 months, used that facility carefully. Not withheld exactly, but rationed, aware that saying too much too fast was its own kind of carelessness. She had been waiting for the right time without quite knowing she was waiting, the way you waited for ground to firm up after a flood, checking before you put your weight on it. The ground was firm. "I didn't come here expecting any of this," she said. "I came here expecting to work hard and keep my head down and give Emma a safe place to grow up. That's all I thought I was going to get, and I thought that was enough." She paused. "It's not all I got." He was very still in the way he was still when something was landing somewhere important. "I love you," she said. "I know that's not a simple thing to say to a man who loved someone before me and lost her. I'm not saying it to make things simple. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you signed those papers, and because you held still on the kitchen floor so Emma could keep your finger, and I think you deserve to know that someone sees you." She stopped. "I see you." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the Montana spring night was doing what it did. Enormous, dark, full of the sounds of a ranch settling into rest. Inside, the lamp burned the same as it always burned. Colton looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her, and his face did something she had not seen it do before. Not the almost smile, not the careful neutral, not the recalibration. Something that had been behind all of those things. Something that had been waiting behind the walls that 4 years alone had built. And it was not comfortable, and it was not smooth, and it was the most honest thing she had ever seen on a human face. "I know you do," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "That's the thing that—" He stopped. "That's the part that got me. That you see me. He looked at his hands on the table. Clara knew me. 12 years I knew that woman, and she knew me. When she was gone, I didn't think there was anyone left who... I didn't think it happened twice. Mabel did not say anything. She had learned with this man that silence was sometimes the most generous response, that filling a space could display something more important. Mabel Hayes, he said, and her name and his voice, in this moment, was its own complete sentence. You were my first surprise in a very long time. And I think you're going to be my last one. And I am... He stopped again and then pushed through the stop, which she knew cost him. I am grateful for every stubborn, clear-headed, garden-rescuing day of you. She laughed. She had not expected to laugh, and it surprised her, the way it came up, real and unguarded, the laugh of a person who is completely safe. He looked at her, and the thing on his face resolved itself into something she recognized finally, the thing that had been living next to the smile all along. It was the smile. Just the smile, plain and full, the smile of a man who had forgotten he still had access to one and had just now remembered. She reached across the table and took his hand. He held it. There is something that the frontier teaches, if you survive it long enough to learn, that belonging is not a thing you are given. It is not handed to you with the deed to the land or the words of a ceremony or the signatures on an official document. It is built, slowly, imperfectly, through 10,000 ordinary days that do not feel like the building of anything while you are in them. Through the kitchen garden you fix before anyone asks you to. Through the fence line you ride in the cold. Through the supper you make when you do not know yet whether the person you are making it for will stay. Through the hand you hold under a courtroom bench, and the letter you write, and the testimony you give, and the field you refuse to surrender, and the man you tell the truth to, when the kitchen is quiet, and the lamp is burning, and you have finally decided the ground will hold. Mabel Rosewood came west with $12 and a baby and a worn photograph, and the specific terror of a woman who has been told, by every available evidence, that she and her child are not enough to be chosen. She came with the kind of fear that had cured itself of drama and become something quieter and more dangerous. The settled expectation of a person who has been disappointed so many times that they have preemptively adjusted their hope downward until it hardly shows. What she found at Hayes Valley Ranch was not what she had imagined. It was harder and colder and more legally complicated and more emotionally demanding than anything she had let herself imagine. Because letting yourself imagine the full version of a thing is a luxury of people who have not yet lost it. What she built at Hayes Valley Ranch was something else. Emma Hayes grew up knowing the east section as the good land, the creek land, the place you went in summer when the heat came on and the water ran cold over the stones. She knew the kitchen garden in every season and knew which rows were her mother's domain and which belonged to Martha. She knew Billy as the person who had taught her to ride and who still, decades later, carved wooden things for the children in his life with the same studied nonchalance he had brought to her first birthday. She knew Dale Marsh as the commissioner who had been fair when fair was not easy, and Agnes Fitch as the woman who had her field back and who laughed all the way now, not almost. She did not remember the train from Illinois or the general store in Hargrove, or the face of a woman named Ruth Calloway who had said something loud enough to be heard through a wall. She did not remember the yard on arrival day, or the crib by the window, or the kitchen floor where a man had held very still so she could grip his finger. She did not need to remember. The shape of all of it was in her anyway, in the way she faced things directly, in the way she saw people, in the way she understood, without ever being told in so many words, that choosing someone was not a single act but a daily one, repeated without fanfare, indefinitely, for as long as you had the days to do it. On a quiet evening in the later years, when the ranch had grown and the children had come, and the Montana plains ran on in every direction the way they always had, Colton Hayes sat on the porch with his wife and the sun going down over the grass, and he took her hand the way he had taken it across a courtroom bench a long time ago, and he said, "Mabel Hayes, you were my first love, my only love, and the only woman I will ever choose." She did not cry. She was not by nature a crier. She looked at him. This man who had said the child is not a problem and had meant every word of it and had proven it every day since. This man who had loved once and lost and had found his way back to it through the stubborn persistence of someone who had not been looking. And she thought about a train platform in Illinois and all the distance between that platform and this porch, and all the things she had carried across that distance, and all the things she had learned to put down. "I know," she said. "So do I." The evening moved over the plains. The ranch went on being the ranch, and the woman who had come west afraid of being nothing to anyone sat on her porch in the long Montana light and understood, with a certainty that required no ceremony and no document and no one's permission, that she had been home for a very long time.